Okay. And it is streaming. We are live. Woo! Okay. So, uh hello everyone. This is going to be our stream for the Red Deal. We stream our book clubs and this book club we're going over the section Heal Our Planet. In this section it just gives practical things that we can discuss over uh what we can do to things around climate change, things around land care, um, and yeah, we're gonna go over some of those ideas. So let's see. If you want, you can take a look at my notes. What's the first thing I talk about? So the first thing that it goes over is introduction. Um, it gives this very oh, why is the word never here in my notes? Okay, whatever. So it says there's only decolonization or extinction, and honestly, I don't think that that's at all an exaggeration. When you just like look at the way that indigenous people have care taken this planet, um, and just the ways that like pretty much like the way that capitalism is structured is like kind of like pushed everyone into this like capitalist mindset that is destroying the planet, and there's really only indigenous people who are holding trying to maintain these practices of taking care of the land in a way that honestly like as human beings we really need to do. And with climate change it's like this whole chapter just goes over the mass extinction event that is literally happening, um and that is because of capitalism, and we need to get back to the ways that people have taken care of the land, which is through decolonization. I don't think that's at all dramatic. Yeah, I was wondering if anyone though had any thoughts on that before we move on.
Um, yeah, I aside from just agreeing that it's not that dramatic a claim, it's pretty just it's a basic fact. It's the reality we live in. I I agree, and I like that several times, not just in the introduction, but as they go through each of the points that we're, we're going to look at, um, the emphasis on caretaking as opposed to extractionism, and also like this concept of ownership, in the sense of we like a human being owning the natural environment. It is part and parcel with the like capitalism mentality, whereas with caretaking it's like here is something that we benefit from and we should take care of in a kind of mutual respect kind of way. And I like that that's being just really super clearly like put as opposed to the current mindset or the predominant mindset, which is just here is a resource, I can extract it, or I can manipulate it, or I can just take it, I can steal it, it's mine now, like this kind of this mentality, as opposed to the indigenous mentality, which is just taking care of what is there, and what is there will take care of you. And it's kind of I like that that keeps is very clearly uh, put forward, and that it's like a current theme through each of the points as well. Like it keeps coming up, and you can tie it back to that. So I really appreciate how that's um, and it's tied into like you like the practical solutions being offered. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, any other thoughts before we move on? Yeah, so the rest of what this says is just kind of expanding on the idea capitalism is contrary to life, caretaking promotion is life. Caretakers, such as parents, are not paid yet do much of the labor. That's something that they pointed out before is that these caretaking jobs are not really valued, but they're also like some of the most important. I mean, they're not even jobs. People they aren't even paid. Like, being a parent, one of the most important things, literally raising people in our society, is something that people don't really get paid for. Even just like the devaluation of labor of teachers who are oftentimes taking care of kids in a way. Um, I like that they say this: restoring a relationship with the land isn't mystical, it's something we legitimately have to do. That's me paraphrasing, but the quote said something very similar. I think for me growing up, I was like, there's something is not right about how we're just destroying a bunch of things. And I remember I would just like say that and be like, I don't think like there's like all these biotic environments being destroyed. Uh, and then also with the understanding of climate change that I came to understand, I was like, this seems really wrong before understanding just like the mass gravity of really what climate change is. And I remember talking about this when I was a lot younger and being like, this just doesn't seem right. And people thinking, oh, you're just like going through some sort of hippie phase, uh, some sort of like weird mystical thinking. And it's like, this is like practically what I always came back to was like, this practically seems like a really bad thing to do. So I'm glad that they explicitly said that. Um, Indigenous caretakers must restore health of the land. Leftists are arguing about who is more injured. This is a first world discourse, and I I definitely think that the well it's it on one hand, like Republicans will call it oppression Olympics, but I also do think it's helpful to understand like the way that like we in the first world will weaponize these kind of statuses of like, I'm more oppressed or this is more oppressed or da 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 da. We really just need to be working together on these issues, and it has kind of felt weird to me. So them saying it's a first world thing, you know, I imagine that people in other places are probably just like, this is an issue, let's just kind of unite on this. Um, the Red Deal proposes to heal from our trauma, but not as individuals from colonialism. This is a really great quote I remember. So the Red Deal advocates for healing for our bodies and the planet, but not from individual trauma alone. We must heal from colonialism and capitalism together. Um, I just love this mentality. Um, that this is something that affects all of us. Like the world has to heal from capitalism and colonialism. Just very clear terms. So instead of finding a seat at the table, we ask that this table get out of our lands. We are more defined, or we are more defined by our dreams of liberation and freedom, and refuse to be defined by trauma and violence narratives as hapless subjects rather than active agents of history. I thought that was so beautiful to hear. Like, also just as a black person, like I this is kind of like a little bit tangential, but like for me, because I grew up around white people, learning what it means to be black was always something very negative. So like me being a black, like the idea of being black was such a negative thing. And I know they're not talking about being black, but they're talking about indigenous issues. But for me, it just like really struck me to hear we are not defined by our trauma. We're defined by our dreams of liberation and freedom. And that just really resonated with me. I thought that was really beautiful. Um, yeah, that is the introduction, which is just a really beautiful introduction, like so inspiring, um, and states very succinctly in clear terms what we need to heal from colonialism and capitalism, and we need to give indigenous people uh, or indigenous people need to be able to caretake this land if we don't want there to be a mass extinction event. Uh, yeah, all of that in just this intro. What are your all thoughts on it?
I keep coming back to the first part, which is talking about how basically what came to my mind was that there's this South Park episode where they're making fun of Al Gore and how like seriously he took climate change and everything like that, and uh, I was like, it seems like as people get older, as like kids nowadays are a lot more attuned to the fact that like climate change is a real problem and it's going to destroy us. And I just remember like thinking back in elementary school, what you were saying, Lua, about how it was like, oh well, this is a problem and everybody's treating you like a hippie, and it's like, the people who were realizing that this was a problem since way back when, it was like, just put it off and just ignore it for as long as you can. And it's like, I really like that in this book that it's established that this way of thinking has been like the thing since like well before Al Gore, and that, like, the reaction of just like continuing to put it off has been the same reaction since. And it's like, we can establish that we know what to do about this because we've been consistent about this like since day one, about like living in a way that's actually sustainable. So that's what came to mind for me.
Hmm. Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to add on that?
The point about not trying to figure out who's more oppressed and just fixing the issues is something I do think a lot about, especially like anytime I attempt to go on trans Twitter, I feel like there's more people arguing about which kind of trans person has it worse than there is people actually trying to fix any of our issues. And I agree because we just need to get things together and actually make it better for everyone.
Yeah. All right. So this is Area One, clean, sustainable energy. Um, these are just some facts. I like writing down just some facts in case I ever need to reference them again. So Amazon rainforest burnt, uh, or sorry, there is over 2 million acres um, of the Amazon rainforest that are burnt. Canada invaded Wet'suwet'en lands, which is something we've talked about a bit before, where they're trying to build a pipeline. Um, Navajo Nation is still one of the largest resources colonies in gas and coal, which I did not know that. Um, and then it goes into a bit about fracking. So fracking has devastated environments. The U.S. backed a right-wing coup in Bolivia for green energy sources like lithium. Oh, so this is something where they talk about. So in this chapter or section, they talk about how you know batteries are pushed as like a cleaner energy source, I believe. Um, sorry, I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but okay, sorry. Let me just jump down. I have to switch back and forth between Discord because when I go to my notes, it's not actually streaming, I don't think. So, yeah, this part here. So, the Democratic Republic of Congo has 60% of the world's cobalt, and Bolivia holds 70% of lithium, which are needed for solar energy. Oh, right, because it's not the batteries, like it's the solar energy that's pushes green energy. These are some of the poorest countries in the world that are creating green energy for imperial countries. Just I think just right there, that was like a really important thing to understand. Um, yeah, so I think in this chapter also, sorry, I'm kind of outlining this haphazardly, but they talk about how with gas and oil, like a lot of those companies are trying to transition over to green energy, but even in these instances, there's still an imperial tie to energy. People have this belief that like, oh, if you just have green energy, that's good energy. But the issue, because this green energy is still found under capitalism, it's still corrupt and it's still imperialist. Um, yeah, so capitalism is incapable of equitably distributing technology, and this is where they finish off. We must. Oh, it says. Sorry, it says imperialism, whereby the wealth and power of global North nations depend entirely upon the poverty and exploitation of global South nations. That was a great definition of imperialism. And then it ends by saying we must ensure that all corporate polluters are held accountable. They must pay for full remediation of land and reparations to the people who have felt the impacts of extraction for generations. This can only be done by divestment, boycotts, or tribal leaders breaking contracts with corporate polluters. So I like that it was like, it wasn't just like they have to pay a fine, they have to completely restore the place, and they also had to pay reparations. I thought that was great. But yeah, what did everyone think about that section?
Um, when it specifically talks about the resources needed for the production of lithium batteries and uh, like all of the continuous discourse that there is about like the feasibility of using accumulators for solar energy. It's like we solar panel technology is pretty much settled, but there's a lot of issues with the kind of like how to store the energy and all of these resources that come from exploited countries, colonized countries, are used for their production. And it's like, yeah, there's this kind of band-aid mentality of like, well, if we just we make more solar panels, if we use more wind turbines, if we do that, then everything is fine. But like you said, it's still built on a foundation of exploitation, of extractionism, of colonization, and on a somewhat smaller scale, but that kind of mirrors it and is probably connected to it as well. Um, and I realize it's going a little bit. It's a bit tangential, but it's similar enough, I think. In large parts of Italy, um, where there has been a push towards more investment and more construction with into green energy, most of it, as far as I know, that's still the case. It might have got better now, but when I was still living in Italy, a lot of it was tied to the mafia. So you would have the only investments and only money coming into green technology being mafia funded. It wasn't necessarily the government, it wasn't the people, it was the mafia kind of saw a great opportunity for money and they went for it. And so and it's like it runs on it's like a video game. It runs on the same engine. It's always exploitation. It's always extortion. It's always extractionism. But it was something that at the time nobody was really talking about. They were like saying, "Oh, the south of Italy, which has historically been poor and underdeveloped and underfunded, they're going green. This is amazing. It's wonderful." But nobody was like questioning, okay, but how has this suddenly happened? Because it's still underfunded. It's still a poorer region of Italy, and yet it's also coincidentally now becoming very green. And like I said, it might have changed by now. Things might be better now, but I remember reading that, and this I feel like there's a strong parallelism there. That there's this kind of assumption that it's as long as the energy is great. Like when people say, "Oh, well, just get electric cars." Like electric cars, it's just coal. It's just oil, but with more steps. It's like you're just adding more production costs, more exploitation, but the
Right.
end result is so. Yeah,
Yeah,
that just reminded me of that.
and just like
Kind of the
dependency on cars too. But yeah, really fast, Jeremy, you have to get going, right? I don't want to. I know it can be hard to step in and say you have to go.
Yeah, thanks. I'll
Okay.
see y'all later.
Yeah,
Bye.
we'll see you later. Bye. Yeah, we're gonna say Corin.
it's kind of the same mentality, or probably the same mentality, as when people try to ban plastic straws or encourage people to use reusable bags for groceries. It's this idea that just innovating something else without fixing the main core issues that are driving the problem in the first place is going to suddenly fix climate change. And then also, a lot of the time, uh, placing the blame and placing any responsibility to fix the issue on citizens that don't actually have control over the production that is causing most of the actual problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like I can't remember where I read this or where I heard it, but basically the whole um this concept of the offsetting your carbon footprint as an individual or uh, as a home, like as a family, as a household, was pushed by like the major oil and gas and energy companies. It's like, well, if we shift the onus onto the consumer, onto the individual, then less is expected of us. And so you'll get companies like Shell that every few years they'll be like, oh yes, we are pushing towards greener energy, but are they? No. They're not. They'll keep telling the individual like, well, if you recycle more, and if you stop using this, and if you do this, then you are helping, but it's up to you. And it's like the amount of change that a person can do, the effect that one person can have against climate change by reusing bags is so negligible compared to what these companies could do.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, putting it
that
on the
it, it
consumer
it's
is so gross.
it's insulting. It's just, and the fact that they've hoodwinked uh, basically all the nations of the world into thinking this uh, is just disastrous. And it's like, you know, yeah, and yeah, I agree. And yeah, the plastic straws thing, just I can't, like, there are no words. I don't have, like, the lack of basic empathy, basic understanding of any reality beyond that of able-bodied people. It's just staggering. It's like,
And also
well,
to like fruits and other things that are packaged in plastic and pre-cut. Some people want to get rid of those things when disabled people, there's a great many who cannot cut their own, and if they want fruit, that's how they're going to be able to get fruit. And instead of making any solutions towards that or holding the companies accountable for being bad for the environment themselves, they put all of the responsibility on the consumers and even more responsibility on disabled people who are just trying.
yeah,
Yeah. Moving on to area two, it's called traditional and sustainable agriculture. Um, yeah, this one talks, I think, about indigenous plants, but I'm just gonna go through the notes, and I'm sure I'll remember things as I'm going through them. So indigenous people took care of their environments by pruning trees or burning meadowlands to create pastures. Um, it's racist that this has not been acknowledged. Like, this is something that, like, this, like, there are so many places where people are like, wow, look at this wild untouched land. Even with the narrative of, in the US, this, the idea of the wilderness. I took this really cool class on environmentalism, and I read this one essay that was just talking about how our idea of the wilderness is actually a constructed idea. And it was just like, it was like talking about how first, like, there's this idea of like the land being untouched and wild, when they had to remove all these indigenous people to be like, wow, look at all this land and the wilderness. And indigenous people have been taking care of the land. Like, there's all these narratives of these places just being like completely wild. And not that they aren't wild in some ways, but just that, but people have been taking care of them too in a relational way. And indigenous people everywhere have been doing that. A lot of people have supposed that a lot of the Amazon rainforest is taken care of by indigenous people. These things are intentionally, so many things are intentionally cultivated. And so it is just really gross to me that people, the idea of the wilderness and untouched land that we often have completely ignores the caretaking that indigenous people do. Um, Next up, it defines the idea of food sovereignty and seed sovereignty. So, food sovereignty was first defined by an international group of peasants called Sorry, the text on my screen is a little bit small. I think La Via Campesina. It defends their right to land and seeds in response to neoliberalism. And that's what this section goes over. So, a lot of this section goes over the way that with seeds and GMOs, they essentially like people don't have right to seeds in a lot of instances. So then that makes an issue like people not having right to food. So with seed sovereignty, the right of producers to breed, harvest, and exchange diverse and traditional indigenous seeds outside patents in the market economy and can be understood within the broader framework. This is at odds with seed patents, cross pollination, and laws catering to agriculture companies. Yeah, there's all these laws where like, with if a non-GMO seed like crossbreeds certain GMO seeds, like people have been sued because they're like, oh, you're not allowed to like breed our seeds, even if it's just like two fields or something like that are just close to each other. It's so messed up. And this is something that really frustrates me that's left out of the GMO conversation, because there was a point where people were like, oh, GMOs are bad because they're not organic. And then there was a point where people were like, well, they actually have the same nutritional value in general, things like that. And so GMOs are fine. And it's like, well, the GMO conversation is actually really the atrocity, isn't it, if things are genetically modified, but the conversation is around like the issues for me are like the way that they just dominate the industry, the way that they like go after farmers. And yeah, even in this instance with indigenous people, the way that they try to like buy their seeds, or have a monopoly on food, all these things. So this is a perfect example. In Mexico, the birthplace of corn, seed markets were flooded with cheap corn seeds, sparking a movement that intends to ban GMO seeds across regions. Um, so yeah, these GMO cheap seeds were pretty much just flooding the market, and then people's non-GMO seeds were not, were pretty much just like not relevant. But then you have basically what you end up having is like all these GMO seeds dominating the market, as opposed to like you end up with the potential like losing seeds of non-GMO plants, and then like that could potentially be lost forever if that is not cultivated. Birth givers, children, and elders are the most marginalized groups for food security. Native land is stolen, and yet Native people aren't allowed to access the goods grown from their own land. That was just, yeah, it's just, geez, just imagine that. That would be just so frustrating to have food insecurity, and it's your land, and you, like, it's your land, and people are profiting off of it, and to be food insecure. When land is restored, can there, sorry, some of the typos. Can there be sovereignty? Okay. Oh wait, only when land is restored can there be true sovereignty to be able to reestablish a relationship with land and non-human relatives. Everyone can help with seed sovereignty by trading with indigenous folks. We need to be against GMOs and have genetically engineered free zones. Yeah. What are people's thoughts on that section?
Brings one thought to my head, which is in reference to how a lot of times nowadays they use one cheat seed, they grow tons of it, and it leaves it vulnerable to disease because it is good at infecting that strain that they are mass producing. It can wipe all of it out. So like what happened to the what used to be the common banana, that we now have a different banana.
Mm-hmm. We were just talking about this the other day about the bananas and how though there's been like many, like, I don't know, like I think in the early 2000s maybe or something, there was like another banana death where like we got a different banana, and now the bananas are dying out again, and we might potentially have another banana. Like, yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, I like that it highlights the GMO technology in and of itself is not necessarily the issue because it's a tool uh, used in this completely, like you said, this wild, horrifying colonialist way where it's like, no, no, you can only have our seeds, our special seeds that we made, and it's like it's this kind of using it as a market tool, as an economic weapon, basically. And it's like it's just another thing that we develop and could be used in a number of ways, and inevitably it gets used as a weapon, as a boot, as a hammer, rather than anything that could help. And yeah, it's really I something more happy though. I like that it keeps uh mentioning and reflecting and keeping into the consideration non-human relatives. I really appreciate that. Um, they don't go off on a tangent on it, but I really appreciate that whenever they talk, particularly this sort of field, they go back to reminding people relatives, not another thing to exploit, not another thing to extract. Their relatives. Keep that in mind. But
Yeah,
that's all I'll say. That's all I'll say.
one thing that I really like about indigenous activists is like I feel like they're so mindful of everyone who can be affected by something in a way that I honestly think they are particularly good at, like acknowledging other relatives. They acknowledge when other people are suffering under something similar. There's this kind of like mindfulness of like the scope of what's happening that I really appreciate, that it's being acknowledged. And yeah. Yeah, anything else that anyone wants to add before we move on to the next section?
Yeah, I'm just going to add that they're using food as a tool to control people. That makes no sense for food to be something that you sell in the first place. You
Right.
should just be allowed to eat.
Yeah. I watched the Terminator movie the other day for the first time. I don't know if any of you've all seen it. Or was it the Terminator? No. Sorry, it was like a different one. Wait, what's the one where he goes to Mars? Is that the Terminator? Tovio, can you help me out here? But it had
Total Recall.
Total Recall. Sorry. I watched Total Recall for the first time and
Get your ass to Mars.
But yeah, in that movie they like tax the air. And so like if you're poor,
Yeah.
you live in this like underground area, and but then people watch the movie and it's like, well, how could you tax the air? You need air to live. And I'm like, okay, like we're so close. Like, how could you like make, all these things that people need to live. It's just really gross that you have to make people pay for that. And if they don't have enough money, then sucks to suck. Like, that's a horrible mentality. Yeah, so let's move on. I think there's a few other sections. So, land, water, air, and animal restoration. Though indigenous people make up less than 5% of total human population, let me read this on here. Indigenous territories cover 22 to 25% of the world's land surface, which is just incredible. The Amazon rainforest produces 20% of the oxygen for the world. Yeah, just all these things, like just there's like all these things that like indigenous people are taking care of and that we need and that we are dependent on. And yeah, and then not, capitalism is just like destroying all of it. And yeah, just like the amount that like indigenous people are caretaking is incredible. And I was wrong. This is the section that talks about the mass extinction event. So yeah, we're in a mass extinction event that is comparable to when dinosaurs were wiped out. And this is really scary. Also, like in the summer, like I think in the summer, like I just don't really see bugs that much anymore, like noticeably. And then I get, the bees dying out, like, just that alone. But yeah, there's just like all these animals that have gone extinct. Like, it's just, whew, it's just a very scary time to be alive.
Yeah.
I think it's like a really good comparison that they make with dinosaurs extinction, because like the conception that it was like
Literally.
boom, asteroid hit and they all died at once. No, it was a slow, gradual death, and it's basically what, like it says, we're living through it now. It's the same exact thing. It's happening slowly, and so people aren't as uh like easy to convince about it, because it's like, oh, but I still see,
Mm-hmm.
bees. I still see pollinating insects. It's like, yeah, but you're seeing a lot fewer of them. And like gradually, eventually, we might not see any of them. And by
Well,
that point, everything is gone. Like if even just that, even just pollinating insects, if they go, then
sure, but like even just with the amount of animals that have gone extinct because
yeah.
of just just ruining environments is comparable to
Oh
right
yeah,
now
absolutely.
to the dinosaurs mass extinction. Like we're already going through it, and that's just like really
Yeah,
disturbing. But like no one, not no one. I shouldn't say that. A lot of people, because they're not interacting with these animals that are going extinct or have gone extinct, then it's just out of sight, out of mind, and
exactly.
yeah. But what blows my mind
Even
that we're actually just, it's not that it's about to happen, like it's already happened. The mass extinction event has already happened and it's continuing to. Corn, were you gonna say something?
every time I see less bugs around, which keeps happening, I get more and more depressed because I freaking need bugs. Like you, I don't just mean like physically in order to live because of things they do, but because bugs are just generally very, very important to me. And I need to see a bug around to feel calm or feel like things are real in the world. And when there's less bugs, it gets harder and harder to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very disturbing. I also, it's so funny. I also feel calmer when I see bugs. Um, it's but yeah, like I think for me, like in the summer, I try not to have like porch lights on because of light pollution. Um, which I know like me having one porch light off will not make a difference. But but in the summer when I do see like bugs like flying around lights and stuff, it's like really exciting to me that it's like it'll be like this like point where all these different bugs are meeting. And yeah, it's been so bizarre because there's so few, and it's just like something's happening, and then reading about it to confirm that is definitely what's going on. um so let me just get through this section really fast. Indigenous people cannot be separated from the land and biodiversity. They look forward to the future for their children, but also gain knowledge from elders. The relationship with past, present, and future creates interdependencies. Um, yeah, I mean, I think like so many humans, existed in this ways until I think more oppressive systems were of exploitation were introduced. Is the thing, and uh, it's really sad to me that like this understanding. I honestly think these kind of systems of like looking to the past, present, and future, and then like not being separated from land and biodiversity are actually a really important part to humans as well. And I hate how it's like just relegated just to like this thing that indigenous people do when it would benefit all of us. Or the way that like people in you know society, or there's like this racism towards indigenous people where it's like this is just like what they do as opposed to something that's important to all people. um we must understand that capitalism is the enemy of the future. It does not see the land as a living thing to be cared for and respected, but simply another tool with which to satisfy greed. Absolutely. Find, join, and help a local organization that is pushing back against pollution or contamination caused by industry and resource extraction. Ancestral wisdom and traditional ecological knowledge tech must be preserved. Um, yeah, so I like how it like gives. I like how each section gives us something we can do. Find groups that are against this pollution in the area that you live in, and yeah, ancestral traditional ecological knowledge must be preserved, because that's the knowledge that allows people to caretake land. um yeah, anything on this section before we move to the next one? Okay. So moving on to section 4. Area for protection and restoration of sacred sites. The United States is an empire bringing death and destruction to those within its grasp. Yeah, 1,000%. Oil and gas industries target Chaco Canyon. In 2019, 33 elders were arrested for blocking access to Mauna Kea for construction of the 30-meter telescope. That was really, that stood out to me because I know Spook has done a lot of activism to try to prevent that. And okay, I'm just gonna get through this. So we understand that protecting our relatives, land, water, ancestors, women, two-spirit animals, medicine, children, and others is at the heart of our customary forms of governance. Yeah, I like how they point out that like taking care of these relatives are a part of the of governance, which is you have to explicitly say under capitalist system because with capitalism it's like a free for all. It's like you don't make enough money, then we're not then that sucks to be you, as opposed to actually governance is taking care of these people. The United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 25, Indigenous people have the right to maintain and strengthen distinctive spiritual relationships with their traditionally owned or otherwise occupied and used lands, territories, waters, and coasted seas and other resources, and to uphold their responsibilities to future generations in this regard. Um, yeah, so it's like something that like even the United Nations recognizes. It's something that's like frustrating because like even though the United Nations recognizes this, they're like, but we're not going to do anything about it. We're going to acknowledge that you have that right, but everything's going to stay the same. So it seems really frustrating to me. Yeah, any thoughts on that section? Okay, good. Okay, section 5, enforcement of treaty rights and other agreements. So it is common for politicians to pledge to honor the treaties as it is for them to break or ignore the treaties. Ah, that's so true. The Nahia, or yeah, the Nahia scholar Emily Riddle whereas indigenous political traditions teach us that it is through our relationship with others that we are sovereign, that sharing is not a sign of weakness, but ultimate strength in diplomacy. Oh my gosh, I loved that. That uh though it is our relationship with others, through our relationship with others that we are sovereign. That sharing is not a sign of weakness, but of ultimate strength in diplomacy. Um yeah, I think oh my gosh, I've had so many conversations with people, and I honestly like think this is like a little bit tangential, but just like my experiences of just like toxic masculinity that's also tied in with his hyper individualist culture of like you got to do things on your own, you got to be a lone wolf. And I I've like said this, like I don't ever want to be independent and focus on just for me unless I literally have to be. Like that's a survival mentality. That's like a trauma response. Like my strength is in being able to have relationships with people. Like that's where I find my sovereignty. And I don't know. I don't want to tell people that they're wrong, but I feel like they're missing out. That's all I'll have to say about that. Um, we're gonna say something, Corin?
Yeah, I think that it's just a little complicated in that because we live in a hyper capitalistic society, it is literally a matter of needing to survive. Like, I end up
Mm-hmm.
wanting to become more independent than I am simply because the more that you have to depend on other people in the society, the more control other people have over
Right.
it's that you're not necessarily wanting to have. It doesn't have to be like that because humans are dependent on each other in general, necessary for us to survive. But the way things are currently set up means that if you just want some basic autonomy, you have to have some level of.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the people so like the people that I meet who like really highly like, well, independence is really important. Like the ability to, yeah, the ability to be able to get what you need for yourself is really important. And then also I think there's like, uh yeah, I mean they should make the distinctions between like some sort of like reality, the like the means in which you do that. Like it's important to be able to not have to be at the mercy of people who can be cruel. And I think capitalism puts us constantly in the situation where we're at the mercy of people. It's very degrading. Um, yeah, I think capitalism that is built in. And I think ideally though, it would be great where you have an interdependency where people are dependent on you, you're dependent on them, and you're working together towards a common collaborative goal. Um, and to me, that's interdependency as opposed to just being independent or being completely codependent. And I'm using terms for relationships more so than economics, but I think we can kind of like apply these ideas similarly. But yeah, it's being, I think capitalism puts us in this position where we're like constantly at the mercy of just whatever circumstance we happen to be in, and that's horrible. It's a horrible feeling. And so it's, but I think that's what pushes like this idea of like needing to be more independent because of the system we're in. So in 1888 Fort Laramie Treaty, for instance, Lakota people negotiated a 32 million acre hunting territory so long as the buffalo may roam or range. In addition to a 35 million acre permanent reservation was made. Oh, and this was made by women. So yeah, I think this treaty is very important to point out because it's basically like these people were like, hey, like you can use this land as long as the buffalo can roam and we'll just co-use it, you know? And that is just not what settlers think. Like settlers are like, you can't use this, like you just can't use this, or like we're gonna wipe you out, or we need to own it and tell you what to do with it. So Viver Bien Pachamama. Viver Bien Pachamama means for the whole earth to live well. It is not anthropocentric, but earth-centric. It is first world capitalist domination that is the problem, not the solution. Um, Next, I wrote down the U.S.-backed right-wing military coup that deposed Mas leader and Bolivian President Evo Morales in 2019 was also a coup against Eco, Covenant, and Indigenous Socialism. Oh, Covenant and Indigenous Socialism. Okay, that ended kind of on a... I don't quite remember everything from that quote, so I can't expand on it. But does anyone have any thoughts on this section before we go to the conclusion? Okay. So, conclusion. Ending colonialism is the oldest, most forgotten struggle. Yeah, I think it's weird because like the whole world, like I was looking at this map of like the world that's been colonized. There's literally like a couple places that like weren't colonized. So it's just kind of like everyone is dealing with colonialism currently, or the ongoing, or the legacy of colonialism, or just like even outsourcing, you know, like making stuff for imperial powers. It's like it is such a present issue, and so it's weird that like it's not really talked about that much. At least I've noticed like in Western, like where I live, basically where I live, and then on these online leftist spaces, it's like this to me, the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, this just needs to be at the forefront of any leftist movement. But it's like not even, people don't even really get what it is. So that's just really weird to me. The struggle against occupation has happened for a long time. This work has also been done by colonized and enslaved people. Again, that's really, sorry, I was just grabbed. But yeah, that's like really great that, just like that recognition, like they didn't have to say enslaved people, but they included that as well. Just like, again, like this recognition of like, kind of like the scope of what's been done. It's really, invites, like, I feel like invited in. I think also a lot of times where I'm like, okay, like we're gonna talk about indigenous issues, um it's like, okay, like indigenous people are talking, which is really important, but it feels also collaborative. Like I feel like as a black person, like I really appreciate that. I want to try to like cultivate that more of, yeah, of this like collaborative feeling. Although it's definitely important to be like, okay, this is not my time to really talk, I'm gonna listen. The last thing is ending colonialism gives us room to think what we are for. We must be clear about what we are for. We are for indigenous life, the life of all human and other than human beings. In order to live fully dignified lives, we must heal ourselves from the destruction caused by colonialism and capitalism by stopping what harms us and desecrates our land, and instead begin to build what will sustain us. Yes, I love, I just love this ending. Like, we need to focus on what we are for. We are for indigenous lives, human lives, not human, non-human lives, and the ending of capitalism and creating what's going to sustain us. Like, they're just always like so focused on what we need to be for, and I love how hopeful that is. Yeah. Does anyone have any closing thoughts?
Yeah. Uh, Sorry, Corey, did you want to?
Nope, nope. Go ahead.
Um, I I agree. Like it's super hopeful. It's super encouraging. It's really stirring. And again, just really appreciate. We've said this before. I think we've said it every book club where we talked about this book. But it's so clear. It's so succinct. It's so uh, to the point, and like using like the terminology of healing when it comes to things that are not um like physical, but things which are, like in this case, like systemic problems, has always been something that I mean, we've spoken about this with the other book we were covering for book club, of where there was a lot of language that I didn't really understand because it felt metaphorical or vague, but they have outlined so clearly and so well what they mean by healing that it's just I'm at a point now where it's like there's no question about what they mean, and I think that's really wonderful. That it's so clear. Sorry, that was a bit of a roundabout way of saying it. But yeah, I think it's incredibly important that it be inspiring, and also so uh, discernible, so clearly understandable, and I I can't see a way of misinterpreting. I mean, this I should be careful because this is
Oh,
almost like an
people will find a
invitation to people.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh shit! Sorry.
You're gonna be like, hold my
Here
beer.
they come. The bros, they're coming. But I think that is it's just like they would have to reach really far to be able to like twist this, because like just every chapter begin like every section begins with just a statement that is just so accurate to the point. There's no beating about the bush. There's nothing. It's like the United States is an empire bringing death and destruction to those within its grasp. Yes, it is. Deal with it. Like, accept this. If you accept it, you can start healing. That's the thing. It's like it doesn't even feel like that there is uh like a malevolence or like a kind of a negative feel. Like it feels just like somebody just stating the truth, stating a fact. It's like it is bringing death and destruction. Resolve this. How do we stop this? And yeah, I really like that. I love this book. I think it's great.
Yeah, this was
Everybody should
such a
read it.
good read. And I love how it's like, it's a really great introduction to all of these ideas. And I love yeah, it just seems like a really great, like if people were wanting to be like, well, what's decolonization? Just this book, I think, just really answers that questions. Like not only what land back is, but like the issues of colonialism, the issues of the way that the issue of the imperial core. It just does a really great job of like going over these things in a way that's really, uh, yeah, that's really accessible and kind of like paves the way, I think, for like I mean for me, I'm like, okay, I can't wait to read more books like on this topic, and leaves me feeling inspired, hopeful. It leaves me with things that I can actionably do, which is very exciting. And yeah, it's a great
Exactly.
book. I really do
It's
think it's like
it's
a must read.
and it because it's so accessible and it's so practical as well, like in its mindset, like with every section, it's always given actionable options. It's always giving suggestions and prompts like, okay, if you want to help with this, here are some things you can do. I feel like it already fields the inevitable question to people, just like people who say, oh, but if you defund the police, who's gonna stop the crime people? And like these this kind of thing. Oh, but then what? Oh, well, if you get rid of this whole colonial system, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna replace it? And like this book just wastes no time. It's like here are all the things. There are
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of things everybody can try, everybody can do.
Right.
And it just I like that it kind of it fields that question right away. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
you don't like none of that nonsense. So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
but if you have a
And without like, because like all these things are things where I'm like, oh, like I wouldn't know how to answer this question without writing a whole book, like talking about like the military industrial complex and the prison industrial complex. Like these are massive, massive topics, and they're very succinctly summarizing why they're an issue. And it's like I wouldn't even really know how to do that because I would just find myself trying to write a whole book or something just on that topic. But they are just so succinctly summarizing these issues. It's yeah. Anyways, great writing. That stuff I just really admire that. That's hard to do. But yeah, anything else before we wrap up this book club? All right. Well, for anyone who's watching, thanks so much. I hope you got a lot out of this book. We have one more section on this, and it's going to be the conclusion. And we're going to meet in a couple of weeks for that. So thank you so much for coming, everyone. And we'll see you next time.